A ranch with secrets. A canyon soaked in lies. One gunman caught in the crossfire. Bullet bait. A Wild West action adventure. Chapter 1. He was aware of his ragged 10-day beard and his travel-stained gear against the subdued elegance of this room. They had told him at the office in Denver that this would be a peculiar case. He was beginning to understand what they had meant. The mechanical problems of erecting this magnificent house in the bottom of the most inaccessible canyon of the Yampa Badlands hinted strongly that its builder had been an unusual man. It was not surprising that the circumstances of his reported death had also been unusual, sufficiently so to attract the sharp attention of the claims department of the Mountain Divide Insurance Co. A door opened and closed beyond the railed balcony across the far end of the living room. Footfalls clicked lightly and quickly along an interior hall. A girl appeared on the balcony and descended the stairs. Rising, Rip waited for her to traverse the length of the room. She was small, beautifully so, but she moved with sure grace and perfect athletic balance which a girlhood spent in the saddle will give a woman. Rip was aware of slightly snubbed, piquant features, large and expressive eyes which he noted could be provocative, and a figure out of a line rider's dream. But these had nothing to do with the business at hand, business in which death was involved at the worst, and fraud at the best, and he went no further than automatic appreciation of them. What caught his attention most strongly and held it were the white lines of internal struggle which chiseled the girl's face and darkened her eyes. Grief, he supposed, the obvious conclusion. A daughter could be close to her father in so remote a place as this. But it was strong grief. A grief which had become desperation. And Rip wondered at it. Suspicion was a claims man's second nature. Communication being what it was, between the canyons of the Yampa and distant Denver, it was nearly 3 weeks since John Thomas had been reported dead. There were characteristics of strength in this girl's face. Sufficient strength to accept death and control grief in 3 weeks. Rip was aware of this. The girl stopped in front of him, with a queer admixture of resentment and uneasiness in her eyes. But the desperation remained also, wild and barely controlled, deep within her. "I'm Sarah Thomas," she said stiffly. "I understand you insist on seeing me. I can't imagine why. I've signed affidavits. My foreman and 2 riders from the ranch have signed them. My father is dead. Isn't that enough? You show little consideration for the tragedy in this house. I hope, Mr. Rip, that you'll make your business brief and your stay in Circle T Canyon short." There was a bitter acidity in her, and Rip felt its sting. But this was a huge claim, and the circumstances were highly irregular as regarded the death of the insured. The Denver office had been explicit in its instructions. The claims supervisor there had a reputation for ferreting out fraud, and the Thomas case had been a dead fish dragged across his trail. As brief and as short as possible. "Miss Thomas," Rip told the girl quietly. "You can help in that. A few questions. I'm field investigator for the Mountain Divide Co. We have a claim, accompanied by the affidavits of death you mentioned, filed in your name for a life benefit of $100,000 under a policy your father carried with us. I have been sent out to verify the circumstances of his death. You think our affidavits are lies?" Rip shrugged. "It's possible. I have seen some which were." "Then you're not going to pay the claim. Your company's going to cheat us?" "Us, Miss Thomas," Rip murmured. "Our files show you to be the sole survivor and beneficiary." The girl caught herself with an effort. "A ranch isn't an individual," she said hastily. "Besides, I've been so used to having Dad with me so long." Rip nodded. "Of course. I'm sorry. How did your father die? He was riding a canyon trail a mile below the house. An outcropping above broke loose and knocked him from his saddle into the canyon. There's a huge eddy there we call the Devil's Pool. We've not found his body. Knocked from the saddle. An accident, Miss Thomas. What do you think? The girl countered bitterly. That I killed him? That's not my job. Not to find how he died. That's for the jaw. Just as prosecution of involved parties for fraud would be for the law if he was found alive. I have only to make up my mind whether or not John Thomas is dead. The girl leaned forward eagerly. And you can decide from what I've told you. You can decide that fast. Yes, Rip agreed. I think I can. The girl eased immediately. She walked with him to the door and opened it. I'm sorry if I've been rude, Rip, she said. I'm afraid I've not been myself the past few weeks. And this ranch is a terrible burden for a woman alone. Bert Hauser, our foreman, will be in with the crew directly. He'll see you have quarters for the night and fresh horses for your trip back. Maybe you'd like to look around till he comes in. The girl paused and looked searchingly at Rip. And one other thing? You'll hurry that payment when you return to Denver, won't you? When I return. Rip nodded. He stepped down into the yard and moved down among the home buildings toward the smoky, noisy run of the Yampa. He sauntered along with the apparent aimlessness of a stranger with time on his hands, but his eyes were busy. Cattle Association records, al which he had hastily glanced in Denver, had rated Circle T Canyon the top producer on the western slope. From the record, there was evidence that John Thomas had left a rich enough estate that his daughter should not be greatly concerned over the immediate payment of even a $100,000 life insurance policy. In spite of the fact that the ranch was huge, its income should be large enough to permit Sarah Thomas to hire a competent manager who would take the burden of its operation from her. And the maintenance of the ranch property should have been able to continue without in the least reflecting the death of its builder. Yet Rip saw disquieting signs on his walk to the river. He saw a cream separator out of use because of a broken drive sprocket, which could have been replaced for a couple of dollars, and a letter to a mail-order outfit. There was a good wagon, abandoned in a weed lot because of a sprung kingpin, when the Studebaker outfit would ship a whole front assembly for less than $25. Wood trim about the buildings told a story, too. It had been once carefully kept, but it was already a season past needing a fresh coat of paint. These things spoke loudly to a man who operated his own clean ranch on the green between cases. This ranch was plainly suffering from a shortage of cash. The kind of shortage which might hit even a big outfit in a bad season. But the market had been high for 2 years, and the mountain country had never known such grass as lay in the bottoms now. It was a bad situation. The need for money was obvious on the ranch. Too obvious to Rip's practiced eye. He went out to the corral and hunkered on the top rail there. The mountain divide was a rich outfit, and many attempts had been made to bilk it. Rip had uncovered several of these. Each had given him satisfaction. But in spite of the familiar signs which indicated fraud here, he could feel no elation. The girl, he supposed. Something about her had drawn his sympathy. He was still atop the corral rail, chewing thoughtfully at a hay stem, when a knot of riders came up the canyon and scattered in the yard. He watched one of these, a tall, swinging, thick-bodied man, light down and step into the main house. The man came out again after a moment, swung his gaze over the yard and started toward Rip. Ed slid from the fence and took the man's hand when it was offered. "I'm Bert Hauser, foreman here, Rip," the man said easily. "Miss Thomas tells me you're leaving in the morning. Quick work. We're grateful. This has been hard on us all. We'll cut you out some stock after supper. Meanwhile, is there anything I can do for you?" Hauser was smooth. Smooth and sure. His lips were smiling, but his eyes were not. Rip was aware of a veiled hostility. He nodded and pointed at the crew gathered around the wash trough. "Yes," he said shortly. "I want to talk to the hand with the longest service on this ranch." Hauser blinked curiously, shrugged, and shouted across the yard. "Baldy. Baldy Brown. I'll have him down here a minute." A grizzled, sour-faced veteran detached himself from the riders and rocked across the yard. Hauser made a brief introduction. "One question, Baldy," asked Rip. "How long have you been in the canyon?" The oldster frowned and spat. 60 days, he said truculently. "Make anything of that?" "Possibly, Rip, that's all." The rider turned away and moved back among his companions. "That's all you wanted to know?" Hauser grunted in astonishment. "From Brown, yes?" Rip nodded. "Now, how long have you been here?" 2 months, snapped Hauser. Then, seeing the implication of the question, he made a hasty and unnecessary addition. "Baldy came in with me. And when the two of you were set, you let the old crew go and brought in a new one," Rip suggested. "Thomas must have liked efficiency. Too bad he didn't live long enough to see how his new crew panned out. Hauser, you can forget about cutting me out some saddle stock. I don't believe I'll be leaving in the morning." Hauser smiled thinly. "No," he agreed. "I don't believe you will, either. We eat in 10 minutes. The foreman turned on his heel and walked abruptly away, leaving Rip with that peculiar sandy and thickened feeling at the base of the tongue, which is the last vestige in most men of an ancient instinct warning of danger. Chapter 2. When the Circle T crew was done washing, Rip stopped by the trough and sloshed the dust from him. This done, he followed the others into the mess hall. The meal was virtually silent, a peculiar thing among ranch hands whose daily riding and the usually solitary nature of their work generally resulted in a bedlam of hurrahing and gossip at mealtime. Hauser's face was a mask. However, Rip noted distrust in many of the eyes covertly watching him, and in Baldy Brown's gaze he read an open, smoky uneasiness. The meal finished, Rip went out into the gloom of the yard and found a wagon tongue from which he could watch the front of the main house. He sank onto it, rolled a smoke, and enjoyed it unhurriedly. Bert Hauser went from the mess hall to the big house. He was gone about half an hour. When he came back down the yard, Hauser carefully avoided Rip Campbell, as did the rest of the crew. Ranch hands, particularly in so remote an area, usually made the first hours of a stranger's arrival miserable with a constant fire of questions and talk in a desire to pick up fresh trade gossip, word of friends, and the general run of outside news. And in addition, saddle men were generally a garrulous and friendly kind. Rip noted this aloofness, coupled with the distrust he had seen in many eyes, and Baldy Brown's open nervousness. It made basis for thought. Rip finished his smoke, but remained on the wagon tongue until he saw Sarah Thomas come out on the veranda of the main house, apparently to enjoy the drift of the evening breeze. He rose then and sauntered across to her. She was a little startled when he appeared at the rail below her, but the determination in her eyes was evidence that she had been expecting him. She did not turn her head toward him, and she spoke very urgently. "You've got to leave Circle T, quickly. Tonight." "Why?" Rip's question was blunt. "I can't tell you. Isn't that enough? Isn't there enough trouble here without your adding to it? Can't you see you can accomplish nothing, that there's nothing to interest you here? You only make it harder for me, for all of us." Rip saw that the girl was on the ragged edge of emotional collapse. Her voice was unsteady. And again, She had used the plural us instead of the singular me. "How long has bad luck been hounding this ranch?" Rip asked, keeping his voice soft. "Since before your father hired Hauser." The girl started, visibly. There was almost hope in her eyes. "How do you know about Circle T's luck? Has somebody been talking?" Rip shook his head. "I was born in a saddle, Miss Thomas," he said gently. "It would be hard to hide some things about a ranch from me." The girl shrugged listlessly. "The trouble began more than a year ago," she explained. "Prize feeders run off even home meadows, whole herds on the upper pastures vanishing, Circle T stock being trimmed until we couldn't ship ahead, and ambush shots at riders when they cut too wide for sign. Then letters threatening Dad's life started coming. Circle T had been doing so well that Dad was about to drop his policy with Mountain Divide. When the letters started coming, he decided to keep it up. We couldn't trace the letters, and with the badlands around us, we couldn't track down the stolen cattle. So your dad advertised for a hard rock foreman, hoping he'd get a man who could stop it?" Sarah Thomas nodded. "Hauser." The girl nodded again. "Yes," she said. "He came in with one man. He took hold of the crew and cut the dead wood out of it. He brought in a rougher kind of man. He rode hard, and he fought when he could find something to fight. But the rustling didn't stop. Not completely. It cut down. But maybe that was natural. There aren't too many head of beef left on our range anymore." Rip looked upward at the girl. "You know this is all none of my business. You know my job isn't to find what's wrong with Circle T." "Yes," Sarah said. "But I can do my job as I see fit," Rip went on. "You know that I might be able to help you. I know you might try. But knowing that, you tell me to get off the ranch tonight." The girl stood up. "There's nothing you can do," she said desperately. "There's nothing anyone can do. Get back to Denver, please. Get payment on that insurance to me as quickly as you can. Do that, and I'm sure I can straighten out Circle T's trouble." Rip shook his head. "Not if you're caught in the kind of trap I think you are. That money would only sink you deeper. I'm not going back to Denver. Not tonight, and not tomorrow. Do you know why?" The girl made no answer. All color had drained from her cheeks. She was staring at Rip with a terrible intensity in which there was an unexplainable mixture of wild hope and livid fear. "I'll tell you why then," Rip continued steadily. "Because your father is not dead, Miss Thomas. And when I find him, I'll have found the root of all your trouble." The girl stared a moment longer, then whirled and ran into the house. As Rip turned away from the railing, a shadow slid out of the darkness beyond the corner of the building. Bert Hauser, followed by two of his men, moved swiftly up to Rip. The foreman held a gun low before him. "Since you like to talk so much, mister," growled Hauser, "I reckon you and me had better palaver. Get moving. Down toward the river, where we can keep it private." Rip saw that the man's words were edged with purpose. He was aware that Hauser was making no bluff with the gun in his hand. It was plain that if Rip did not start moving, he would die where he was. He stepped out, angling across the dark ranch yard toward the distant rumble of the racing Yampa. His captors fell in behind him. Once, far across the yard, Hauser grunted a brief command. Rip altered his course and took a narrow trail which held level along the wall of the canyon, while the river and the canyon bottom slanted steeply away below. As the walls of the slot constricted along this lower reach, the noise at the river became more pronounced, and an ugly note rose in it. Rip felt a drift of mist across his face. A tremendous hydraulic power shook the air. Then suddenly the narrows were passed, and the sound of the Yampa became a soft, swift sibilance. He glanced down. Below him was a natural tank in the course of the canyon. a roughly circular area in which the entire river spun in a great, almost silent eddy, a vast and incredibly swift whirlpool. Hauser spoke from behind him. "The Devil's Pool, Rip. You're so anxious to find John Thomas, you can go the way he went." Rip heard a whisper of movement. He flung himself against the rock wall rising above the trail, but he was too slow. The barrel of Hauser's gun sliced downward. Hot violence exploded in Rip's head. His knees sagged and he staggered. He tried to cling to the rock, but rough hands seized him and spun him loose away and outward. Chapter 3. Momentarily dazed by the blow on his head, Rip was only partially aware of the thin, rising terror which accompanies a long, plummeting drop into space. He knew water was below, silently rushing water which would have the force of stone if his body struck it in an awkward position. He threshed in midair, trying to straighten himself. Then he struck, feet first and at only a small slant. Even then the impact was brutal, driving the wind from him, and he went far below the surface. The water was cold. In that way, it was a welcome shock. It cleared his head. Fighting down panic, he stroked powerfully with his arms, fighting toward the surface. After an interminable time, air was against his face and he gasped for it. He was conscious of rushing movement, of the living, treacherous power of the current carrying him. The segment of night sky, framed by the canyon walls, wheeled dizzily above him. Something in the water smashed painfully against him. His hands pawed out and gripped the branch-stubbed, uprooted length of a small cedar sapling. He clung grimly to it. A down current seized him and sucked him under, sapling and all. A cross eddy turned him twice over. When he broke water again, he was close to the wall of the canyon. The segment of sky above continued to wheel. Suddenly it stopped, and Rip was conscious that the circular whirling had become a swift downward rush toward another constriction in the walls of the canyon. Remembering the thunder and the spray thrown up by the narrows above, he knew he could not live through another such race. Still clinging to the dead cedar stub, he struck out with his free hand. It was agonizing work, what little progress he made seemingly lost in the swift run toward the narrows ahead. A rock jutted out from the canyon wall. He fixed his attention on it and paddled desperately until sobs were sticking in his throat, gasping spasms of exertion. The rock seemed too distant, impossible to reach. Then one of the wild, patternless eddies alive in the water caught Rip and slammed him with merciless force toward his goal. Water-polished granite slid under him, then a tearing, potholed sandstone formation. Using the cedar stub as a brake against the rough surface, he slowed the drag carrying him until his fingers could grip the edge of a pothole. Slowly, very carefully, for fear he might slip and fall back into the racing current, he dragged himself from the water. The potholes were scattered up a steeply slanting scarp. He worked his way painfully, and after an interminable time, he came to a shelf damp with spray only about a safe 20 feet above the rushing Yampa. Exhausted and shaken, he sprawled onto this. He did not know how long he had been lying on this shelf, wet and trembling with reaction, when a voice spoke very close to him. It was a peculiar voice, half plaintive, and filled with a peculiar note of terrible uncertainty. "Sarah, is that you, Sarah?" Rip rolled over. A rising moon, up the canyon, was throwing a yellow brilliance into the slot of the Yampa. Because of a marked, bulging overhang above, little light filtered onto the bench where Rip lay. But there was enough for him to distinguish a startling figure. The owner of the plaintive, uncertain voice was a man. A big man, evidently, in spite of the dispirited sag of his shoulders and the emaciated condition of his body. He had no shoes, but wore a ragged pair of pants and a cloth swathing about his head which Rip could not identify. It was either a crude bandaging or a bandana of sorts against the mists rising from the river. Rip rose slowly, and the man shrank back with a quick, livid look of fear. "No, not Sarah, Mr. Thomas," Rip said quietly. "But I bring you a message from Sarah. She's still working hard to save the Circle T, and she wants you to know there's hope now." "Hope?" the man muttered. "Hope? How can there be hope? But you bring the kind of message Sarah would send to me. Not the kind I always hear. You aren't one of the others, then. You aren't one of Bert Hauser's men." "No," answered Rip Campbell. "I'm an investigator from the Mountain Divide Co." John Thomas sank back against the wall behind the shelf and slowly slid down it to a sitting position. His hands rose to the swathing about his head. "Hope, you said," he muttered bitterly. "You said there was hope. But if the company has sent an investigator, then it won't pay that insurance. And without the insurance money, there can be no hope. Hauser promised us that." Rip sat down beside the man. Thomas was obviously sick in body. It was possible that much of his sickness of spirit could sprout from the same source. Rip felt an elation in having found the man whom he had decided must be alive. A hunch was not always so reliable or so readily substantiated. But there were 100 questions. It required an effort to go slowly. "You are John Thomas?" The gaunt man nodded. "What happened to you?" Thomas raised his head, then shook it and lowered it again to his hand as if it hurt him savagely. "I'm not sure," he said vaguely. "It's hard to remember. I'm not sure what really happened and what I've just imagined." "From the beginning, you mean?" It was Rip's turn to nod silently. "Hauser. He was the beginning." Thomas spoke slowly. "I should have seen it, but I didn't. Half the stock on Circle T vanishing into the cedar breaks, an empire, an honest-to-God one-man empire, bled to death right under my nose. And when I advertised for a hard-case foreman to fight for me, Hauser showed up. I should have seen it was too quick, that he'd been waiting. When he started cleaning out my regular crew and bringing in his own men, I should have known I'd brought the devil right into my own house. Sarah saw it. Maybe I was stubborn. But I'd built this ranch, and I had to save it." The man stopped. His voice trailed off. He seemed almost asleep. He roused himself with an effort. "Then I was hurt. A bad fall from a horse. My head. Fuzzy so much of the time. To think hurts now. And there are times I can't think. A doctor. A doctor is the answer. But how can I get to one when Hauser keeps me here and watches Sarah? He wants the insurance money. I'm dead. I am to stay dead. When the insurance money is paid, Hauser will take it. He'll leave Circle T, then I will be free of the canyon. Sarah can take me to Denver. I've been sick. No one will know me, and will be careful. A doctor will fix my head. When I can think again, Sarah and I can come back to the ranch. We'll have that, at least. John Thomas will be dead, but a nameless old man will be alive, and Sarah will have Circle T after me." Rip remained silent. Here was the whole thing, none of it surprising, and all of it fitting together. The ammunition the claims department in Denver needed to put virtually every soul on the ranch behind bars. Certainly Hauser and Thomas himself, possibly the girl. Rip found himself thinking of her. As field man, he might be able to draw his report to ease her out of it. But the old man was a sitting duck for the law book boys Mountain Divide had hired to protect it. And after this session here on the river, there was little doubt what a prison term would do to this battered, shaken rancher. Rip swore quietly. If there was a man with a heart in the Denver office, and the right kind of a report went in, the axe could fall where it belonged, on Hauser alone. But Mountain Divide didn't have that kind of a man in Denver, and a field investigator was supposed to report facts, all of the facts. "It's dishonest," Thomas murmured. "Disgrace. Can't even use my own name anymore. But Sarah will have the ranch. She'll have what I built for her." His voice softened down to unintelligibility. Rip tried to rouse him again and failed. The man appeared to have fallen asleep. Curious, Rip unwrapped the swathing about Thomas's head. The cloth proved to be a clumsy bandage about a terrible scalp injury. Rip's shirt was wet and far from clean, but it was better than the filthy rags he had removed from the wound. He ripped the shirt into strips and bandaged Thomas's head anew. He was just finishing this when Thomas stirred. His eyes rolled wildly about. Suddenly, he scrambled to his feet, crouching. "They're coming," he breathed wildly. "They're coming again." Down the foot trail from the house, and swearing because they have to walk a mile of ledges in their boots. "They'll bring food, and they'll hold it away from me. They'll laugh and make jokes at me. Hide. That's the thing to do. Hide. Sometimes they can't find me." The man scuttled down the ledge and vanished. Rip followed him a few feet and discovered that when the Yampa had been at the level of this ledge, it had hollowed out a cave of sorts back of it, perhaps a series of caves. Thomas had vanished into the mouth of this. Rip was puzzled for a moment, wondering if the rancher's alarm was due to his dazed and sick condition. Certainly, Rip had heard no sound. Then he realized that Thomas had been here, in the bottom of the canyon, long enough to have become accustomed to the roaring of the river, and that he could likely pick up sounds which would be lost to others in the thunder rocking the canyon. Moving carefully, Rip stepped back into the mouth of the cave into which the demented rancher had vanished. A moment later, a ladder roughly fashioned of a pair of riatas and a series of short cedar rungs appeared magically on the wall beside the cave mouth. It had been, Rip realized, dropped down from above. The ladder swayed. A man's boots appeared, then another's. The two Hausa men looked down into the river below uneasily, then swung toward the cave. "Damned old fools, hold up inside again," one of them growled. "Suppose we've got to root him out. Bert's got to keep posted as to how he's doing. That girl's a firebrand. If that insurance money comes in, she sure as hell won't part with it till Bert's shown the girl her dad ready to deliver." "How the old boy keeps alive is past me," the other man answered. "That rap on the noggin he took when that wild black pitched him out of his seat would have killed two ordinary guys. And this hole Bert's been keeping him in ain't exactly a healthy place, what with practically no food and all. If you'd built this ranch, you'd put up a pretty good fight to keep it," muttered the first man. "There's sand in Thomas, all right. Did you see anything below? That son of a gun Bert tossed into the drink tonight was Rip Campbell. I've heard of him. Runs to sand himself. I'd feel better, and I reckon Bert would too if we'd sight his carcass along the river somewhere." "What carcass?" the other man grunted. "When the Devil's Pool gets through chawing a man, there ain't no carcass left. Sand or not, Rip's dead. Come on, let's smoke out Thomas and get back up on top. I don't like it down here." The two stepped into the mouth of the cave. Rip had been scrabbling about on the rock floor, hunting for some kind of weapon. He realized suddenly that Thomas's prison had been carefully cleaned of such before the rancher was brought here. There was only one course left open. He flattened against the wall, the inner darkness his one hope for even odds. A moment later the two were abreast of him, and he shot out from his hiding place in a hard, wicked dive. Chapter 4. Rip's dive was low. He passed between the two Hausa men, his shoulders catching both in the knees and spilling them roughly. It was so dark a man could not use his eyes. And this was no time for rules. Like a cornered cat, Rip worked in a silent fury. A man's face was close at hand, his breath in Rip's ear. Ed rammed an elbow outward, centering a face. The man grunted noisily. Rip's hand clamped in his hair. He jerked the head high, then rammed it downward with the full weight of his body. The impact against the floor made a soft, hollow sound within the cave, and limpness ran through the fellow. A little to one side, the second rider was entangled in Rip's legs. Ed could hear the rasp of steel along stone as the man whipped his gun from under him. There was likelihood that a third man had been left at the top of the ladder. A shot might alarm him, send him for help. There was no time to reverse and reach the second rider with his hands. Rip bunched his legs and drove them outward in a lashing kick. They brushed the man's torso and apparently caught his arm. There was a metallic click, and a faint spark showed where the man's gun hit the stone flooring of the cave somewhere yards into the interior. The man himself rolled free with a startled, angry oath. "Why, you scrawny old scarecrow." Mistaking Rip for Thomas, the Hausa man scrambled to his feet and came back in a rush of his own. Flat on his back, risking chance of a wild kick in the head in order to have the purchase of the floor under his shoulders, Rip waited. The fellow came in knees first, cleverly locating his foe by the sound of his breathing. The man was heavy, and he understood close work. Ed writhed a little to one side at the last moment, avoiding the full force of the driving knees, but they were crushingly punishing even then, and Ed felt the air burst from his lungs as the impact came. Big hands reached and clamped about his throat. Powerful shoulders were behind the grip, and Paravane realized he was in danger of the same treatment he had himself administered to the other Hausa man. Sickened, retching for air, and with his throat virtually closed in a fingered vice, a frenzy swept him. Arching his body suddenly, and twisting at the same time, he threw the man's weight from him. The suddenness and the twist broke the fellow's grip. The darkness was too much for Rip, whose fists instead of clamping fingers were his best weapons. He rolled, got his feet under him, and dove for the faint light of the cave entry. The Hausa man was close behind him. Just as Rip reached the opening to the shelf outside, his boot toe caught on a small unevenness of the floor, and he pitched headlong onto his face. The man behind him squawked sharply. At the same time, Rip felt a jolt against his thigh and realized the Hausa rider had tripped against him. The man shot over Rip, landed hard on the very edge of the shelf, and clawed frantically for an instant for a grip. But his momentum was too much, and he tipped on over the edge and vanished. A short, rising wail came up from the void, floored by the silent maelstrom of the Devil's Pool. A voice on the rim above shot down anxiously. "Christy, what's the matter down there?" Rip roughened his voice. "The blamed old fool's in a wild spell. We can't corral him. Give us a hand here, will you?" The man above grumbled an oath, and the ladder down the face of the rock commenced to swing again. Rip ducked back into the cave. He could not find the gun he had kicked from the hand of the man who had gone into the pool, but the weapon of the first man was still in his belt. Lifting this, Rip moved back to the shelf. The ladder was apparently short. The man from above had already reached the bottom. He stood on the ledge, glancing about uncertainly, his gun in his fist. Rip had before witnessed the phenomenon of a situation in which a man could seemingly smell something wrong without there being any other warning at hand. This now seemed to be the case. The man from above was very cautious, and as Rip moved a little toward one side to keep himself hidden as much as possible, the fellow saw him. Not only that. Already suspicious, the man seemed to recognize that the figure dim within the cave was not that of either of his companions or of John Thomas. He made no outcry and gave no warning. He flung his gun up and fired. It was hasty, and the shot missed Campbell, but it struck the rock a scant 2 feet from him and flung a painful screen of shattered stone against one whole side of his head and neck. One eye clouded with blood. The man on the shelf dimmed, but Ed saw his wrist move, preparatory to triggering a second shot. Without time to raise his weapon high enough for fine shooting, and with his torn face a distraction which made accuracy difficult, Rip fired his commandeered weapon twice from waist level. For a long instant, he was afraid he had missed. Then the man on the shelf turned awkwardly, took 2 steps toward the foot of the ladder beside the cave entrance, and buckled. He went to his knees, lurched once more to his feet, and completely losing his direction, staggered off into space from the edge of the narrow shelf. Rip felt shaken. He dropped down on his hunkers for a moment. Finding a strip of his shirt left over from bandaging John Thomas's injured head, he wiped at his face and fingered the wounds along one side of it. They were superficial, though bloody. Painful in the extreme, but of no consequence. Rising, Rip went deeper into the cave than he had thus far gone, and found John Thomas huddled on a pallet on the floor with ragged bedclothes pulled up over his head, after the fashion of an uneasy child in a thunderstorm. He raised the man to his feet. "It's all right, Mr. Thomas," Rip said quietly. "It's all right now. We're going to get out of here. We're going home." "Back to Sarah?" whispered Thomas. "Back to Sarah," Rip agreed. The old man stiffened. His head straightened on his neck. "We've whipped them then. By hell, I knew no thieving son could beat Circle T down." "We've won the first hand," Rip corrected. "If we're careful and work it right, we'll clean the table." "We'll be careful then," Thomas said with an exaggerated, somehow pitiful demonstration of caution. And he followed Rip Campbell to the foot of the ladder, sending the old man ahead of him, and following closely so as to guide the uncertain feet, and to catch the rancher should he be unable to complete the climb because of his weakened condition. Rip moved up the ladder. Ed was aware that his escape from the Devil's Pool and his tangle with the 3 Hausa men at the cave under the overhang had been close things, strongly streaked with luck. But the premonition was in him that they were pale preludes to what would face him when he returned to the Circle T headquarters with this dazed, light-headed, and unpredictable man who was worth $100,000 in cash to both Rip's own employers and Bert Hausa. Chapter 5. The climb up the 30-foot ladder was interminable. John Thomas was breathing heavily when they reached an upper ledge on the side wall of the canyon. Rip was momentarily uneasy, for fear the injured man would collapse. But one of the unpredictable changes which appeared to seize Thomas as a result of the effect of his injury swept him, and he stiffened. "Sarah," he muttered. "Sarah." And he started steadily along the narrow shelving trail. Rip fell in behind him, readily understanding why Hauser's men cursed at having to foot this mile-long tortuous track from the ranch to the cave. They had traveled considerable distance when Thomas halted. "I want to go over this slowly," he said carefully. "I want to be sure I understand. You are an insurance man, come here to see if I was alive or not. Your name is Rip. You understand what Bert Hausa has been up to, that he has virtually broken the Circle T, and that since my accidental injury, he has kept me prisoner in the hope of getting the insurance money." Rip nodded. Things looked good for the moment. It appeared Thomas was in for a period of lucidity. This would be of great value, particularly since he knew the details of the ranch layout, even in the darkness about them. However, the hope was short-lived. Thomas immediately passed his hand over his eyes and began to mutter again. "Enemies, enemies everywhere. But I'm not down yet, Sarah. Not clear down. Keep hoping, girl. Keep hoping." Rip took the older man's arm and started forward again along the trail. The next half-hour was an eternity of uncertainty. There was the constant fear that Thomas's fevered imagination might work up hallucinations which would terrorize him, that he would cry out and alarm Hauser's crew. It was a fair guess, also, that Hauser would directly become impatient over the failure of the 3 who had gone to the cave to return, and the chances were good that he would send others out to see what had become of them. There was a constant chance, too, that some man of the new Circle T crew would be idling about the yard at the wrong time and place, and thus cut across Rip's slow approach to the main house. Rip guarded against these possibilities as best he could. But his primary purpose was still to get Thomas into the house where his daughter could look after him. He believed this was essential. It seemed reasonable that when Hauser discovered that Rip Campbell was not at the bottom of the Devil's Pool, and that Thomas himself was no longer prisoner in the cave, the foreman would take two abrupt, simultaneous steps. He would, in the first place, make certain that the investigator who had escaped him once did not do so again. At the same time, he would attempt to remove Thomas completely, taking his chances on being able to hold the rancher's daughter until such time as the insurance money had been paid, rather than again run the risk of another company man filtering down the Yampa and discovering, as Rip had done, that the supposedly dead rancher was still alive. The approach to the main house was therefore very touchy work. In the end, however, Rip and his companion made it, and out of a long habit which had not been derailed by suffering and injury, Thomas fumbled along the logs of the rear wall of the building until he found a rusty key to the small rear door letting into his office. The room within was dark. Thomas stumbled against a small table and muttered a soft, protesting complaint. Quick footfalls sounded in another part of the house, and a moment later, Sarah pulled open the door into the study. Her fear was more marked. She was at the obvious limit of control. Her lips formed a stiff query. Who is it?" "Quietly, Miss Thomas," Rip cautioned. "It's Rip Campbell, and your father." "Dad." This time her voice was soft, controlled. She ran swiftly into the room. Thomas took a few uncertain steps, and they met in an embrace of shaken relief. Rip stood apart, permitting them this moment. He would have to shatter it soon enough. This man, though prisoner, had agreed to a representation of his death to an insurance company for the purpose of illegally receiving benefits under a policy. This girl had of her own free will signed false affidavits of her father's death for the same purpose. That the money was to be used as a virtual ransom to buy her father's freedom and safety was a point beyond consideration of the law. According to the books, these two were due for prosecution, hands down. And Rip reflected sourly that the Denver Claim Office was so blasted righteous that a common-sense plea would not budge them. This was fraud, and the Thomas would be crucified for it, if the field reports contained all the facts. It was a temptation. A certain inner pride had always held Rip to strictest accuracy. But there seemed circumstances here. He was wrestling with the thought when Sarah Thomas crossed to him. Her eyes were not friendly. Ed realized she knew much of what was going on in his mind. She knew the inevitable result of the insurance company finding her father after the incriminating affidavits had been filed. And he admired her for the fact that whether or not she was aware of his own reluctance, she did not attempt to cajole him. "Now that you've found father, one suppose the next step is to start for Denver," she suggested acidly. "The brilliant investigator and his two prisoners." Rip winced. He nodded toward the windows. "Ordinarily, maybe, yes," he said. "But the custom is to take in all conspirators in a fraud when you take in any, and there's one or two still missing." "Hauser." Rip nodded again. "Don't be a fool," the girl said sharply. "You may be good, but Hauser has 9 men on this ranch. Not even you could face those odds, Mr. Mountain Divide. Let's go quietly, out the back way. Any other risk is too big." Rip smiled. "And with that big a crew, you think Hauser is so asleep that the 3 of us could quit this ranch without being caught in the process? If any of us are to leave Circle T, Hauser will have to be taken care of first." The girl bit her lip. Take your father, Rip went on, and hide him. Hide with him. Keep out of the way. If I'm not back in half an hour, then you can try the back way if you like, and you won't have to worry about any reports. There won't be anybody to make them. The girl started across the room with her father, then stopped abruptly. Reports? She questioned. Just what kind of reports are you going to file? Rip scowled. Miss Thomas, I don't know, he said honestly. Now, find a hiding place. The girl nodded numbly and piloted her father out the door into the body of the big house. When they were gone, Rip stepped again into the night by the little back door. Circling toward the front of the main building, he surveyed the yard. Although lights were up in the bunkhouse across the compound, Hauser and his men were gathered about 10 yards out from the veranda of the main house. They appeared to be watching the front of the building very closely. Rip shoved out far enough from his own corner to see what was drawing their attention. He swore softly. Sarah Thomas had done a very stupid thing, or a very underhanded one. It set Rip's doubts about her to wheeling again. The girl was in a tight spot, he knew that. Having signed a false statement of her father's death, she must now realize her own position once the facts reached Denver and Mountain Divide began prosecution. She must also realize that her father would be involved to the wreck also. Rip cast his mind back to the reunion scene in the darkened ranch office in an effort to measure the girl's attitude there. A numbness had seemed to characterize her, but it could have been a screen for bitter enmity and rapid planning. And there was always the possibility that Sarah Thomas had measured the odds her own way. There was the possibility that she felt that since her father and herself were again together, they might be able to deal to better advantage with Hauser, past experience be damned, than with the tall, quiet man whom Mountain Divide had sent to Circle T. If she had so decided, then Rip had enemies behind him as well as in front. He watched the light moving across the windows in the front of the house, the light Hauser and his men were watching so intently. It was obviously a lamp in the hands of either John Thomas or his daughter, and it plainly marked their course along the second floor. It disappeared momentarily, then winked again into being in one of the tiny dormer windows of the attic space. It was a complete revelation of the hiding place to which Rip had sent the girl and her father. It might also be a signal to Hauser. Or it might be nothing more than the utter stupidity of shaken nerves. Whatever it was, it created a diversion and Rip seized it. Hauser's men had bunched close about their boss. Rip, flattened against the front wall of the house, slid carefully closer to them. It's the gal, all right, one of the riders growled. Prowling. She's gone off her head too, I reckon. Hauser snorted. Not that little witch, he bit out. She knows that all that's between me and this ranch right now is her. She'll fight till she drops, but she'll hang on to her senses. This is something different. Looks like she's holding up. And why? I don't like the way this fits in. You boys remember what I told Christie and Harris and Sawyer to do. Get down to the cave and see if the old man was still kicking, somebody said. And while they was there, to look along the edge of the pool for the carcass of that long gent from Denver. Hauser nodded. And those 3 boys ain't back. See how it fits? Something's gone wrong. Nobody could live through the Devil's Pool, but Baldy, who's heard something about this Rip, says he was rocky enough to do it if anybody could. Maybe Rip got to the cave and jumped Christie and the boys, him and the old man together, say. Or the old man, crazy wild, might have turned on them and surprised them. I'll give you odds either way that they're right there in the house now. Baldy Brown shoved forward. Then I reckon we'd better root him out, eh, Bert? Hauser grunted. See, he makes a stand against you this time. I'm fed up with playing. Bring him out toes up this time. We'll ship his carcass to Denver COD Aye, that blasted insurance company wants its proof so blamed bad. And I'll settle with the girl when the money comes through. Knotted together, Hauser and his men started silently forward. Chapter 6. Rip had planned an Indian game in the yard, biding his time and picking his men one at a time. He had a chance in this fashion. But now he was crowded. He was aware that the borrowed gun in his hand did not contain enough loads to handle Hauser's bunch in a lump, even if he ran into the luck of the gods. Still, if Hauser got his boys into the big house, the game would be done. Rip decided swiftly, and scuttled along the wall of the house toward the steps leading up to the veranda. Then, a fractional moment before he was certain to be seen, he dropped into a crouch and spoke sharply. "Let's stop it here, Hauser." He had hoped the element of surprise would give him an additional moment. So far as the balance of the crew was concerned, it did. But Rip had underestimated Hauser. The man's swift senses and quick mind recognized his voice, placed it, and grasped the entire situation all in an instant. Hauser wheeled a little, dropped low himself, and flung a shot into the wall behind Rip's shoulder. Only a little behind his boss, Baldy Brown flung up his iron. Rip fired while Brown's weapon was still moving, and the man doubled abruptly onto his face in the dust. Hauser ducked back in a quartering turn, which took him behind the remaining 5 men with him. Another man fired at the flash of Rip's gun, and Ed was flung back against the peeled poles of the house wall, shaken and hurt. From the shelter of his men, Hauser fired again, still a little wide but much too close. Rip straightened. He knew he was going to go down, but the grim thought persisted that if he could reach Hauser, if he could take the Circle T foreman out of it before he caved himself, the others would probably break. They'd be through with their scheme here. They'd lack the drive and guts to carry it through without Hauser's prodding. They'd clear off the ranch. Holding his gun up steadily in front of him, he stepped away from the house, firing with a merciless regularity as he advanced. He was hit again. Then, suddenly, a heavier note was taken up in the firing. A man went down a yard wide of the mark at which Rip had loosed his last shot. The Hauser bunch broke, scattering a little. Another doubled up. Hauser himself was again in the open, fully startled now and without shelter. The heavier fire was ragged. Rifles, Rip knew, from the house behind him. From the dormer windows of the attic space. Sarah Thomas and her father. But why? Why had the old man and his daughter joined him? In the hope, perhaps, that with Hauser and his men out of the way, they could then deal with the insurance man, whose return to Denver would put them at the mercy of the company they had attempted to defraud. It wasn't a pleasant thought. Once Hauser's men were scattered or cut down, one of those big rifle slugs from the house between Rip's shoulder blades would solve a lot of problems for John Thomas and his daughter. A lot of problems. Rip shook his head, clearing it and driving the Thomases from his mind. His eyes were fixed on Bert Hauser. He swung grimly toward the man. The foreman fired, missed, and dropped to one knee. He fired again, and Rip leaned into a hard blow which brought a windy, tortured grunt from him. But he held on. Suddenly, Hauser was directly in front of him, coming up from his knee-bent position with eyes wide in alarm, and his whole attention riveted on Rip's face. The balance of the renegade crew had vanished from Rip's own attention. The rifles were still roaring intermittently somewhere behind him, but none of their slugs were whistling about him, so he supposed the Thomases still had other targets in the yard at which to shoot. Hauser was his man. Hauser was within reach of his hands. The rest could wait on this. A running pain which rose as the shock of his wounds subsided left no room for other thought in Rip's mind. His hands went out. They seemed slow, yet there was impact when they closed on Hauser, so he supposed after all the move had been swift. He caught the foreman by one shoulder and jerked him toward him. Then, because this was not punishment or self-defense, but a final thing to be settled swiftly, he used the hard bludgeon of his forearm instead of his fist. As he was dragged forward, Hauser pivoted. Rip used this spinning motion and turned himself in the opposite direction so that both movements added to the velocity of the blow. With smooth and beautiful timing, he raised and stiffened his bent arm, catching Hauser on the side of the jaw with the hard and solid bone of his arm just below the elbow. Hauser's head went up and to one side at a crooked angle. The man began to sag. Without breaking the rhythm of his own advance, Rip caught Hauser's head under the crook of his arm, locked his own wrist with his free hand, and made a terrific twisting upward heave. At about the height of Rip's shoulders, Hauser's head pulled from his grip, and the man somersaulted backward. He landed heavily in the dust of the yard, and lay motionless, except for a slow pulling up of one leg so that its knee was raised a little. This ceased, and the leg fell over limply and unnaturally to one side. Rip swabbed clumsily at his face with one hand, and took a forward step to look down at Hauser. Satisfied and filled with a vague wonder at how quickly a thing could end, he turned and started back toward the house. He could see light behind the attic dormers, and both of the small windows were open. But the guns which had fired from them were silent. He wondered about the Thomases, but could not focus his mind. A glance over the yard showed him 6 men lying in a ragged sprawl across the compound. 4 had dropped as they ran toward the corral. 2 lay close at hand, where Rip had himself tagged them. The crew Hauser had brought onto Circle T was wiped out. There was a big rocker on the veranda of the house. Rip's attention fastened on it. He wanted to sit down. He'd walk that far. He'd walk up the steps. But it was an interminable distance, and the need to sit down grew too great to bear. He sat flatly in the dust, and his mind, veering reasonless, touched on the Circle T report he would have to forward to Denver. That report had troubled him so gravely. It seemed ridiculously easy now. It was simplicity itself. The devil with the bloodless and self-righteous desk men in the claims department. John Thomas had been found alive. There had been an honest error. The affidavits were rescinded. The death claim was retracted. The whole thing had been a mistake. And there was another thought in Rip's mind. A man born on the grass should stay on the grass. Maybe he was done with protecting Mountain Divide's bank account. Maybe he would clean up this thing. Maybe he would settle with the Thomases. And after that, maybe he would ride north a ways. Toward the Gunnison would be a good place, and find him a canyon to his own liking. Rip looked up. The front door of the house had opened. Sarah Thomas, rifle still in hand, ran down across the yard. Her father came out after her and sank into the rocker on the porch which Rip had been trying to reach. Rip watched the girl. He would have to make her understand that she was done with fear. He would have to make her believe that retraction of her claim to the company was all that was required from her. But Sarah's hostility was gone. So was the tightness from her face. And she seemed to have forgotten her earlier concern about his report. She dropped to one knee beside him in the dust. You're all right, she choked. Considering, Rip agreed dryly. Here, let me help you. We'll get you into the house. There's a sheepherder down canyon. I'll ride for him and send him on to Cedar Crossing for a doctor. The girl bent above Rip and lifted. The brief rest in the dust seemed to have helped. He came up and allowed himself to be piloted unsteadily into the house. A little later, Sarah came back into the room in which she had installed Rip and her father. She was clad in saddle gear, ready to ride down the canyon. Rip motioned her close to his bed. "Ma'am, if you'd bring me paper, there's my report. The sheepherder could take it to a telegraph office, and you could send a retraction of your claim." Sarah smiled. I thought you were worrying about that. Stop it. I'm not. I'll send my retraction when I've got a doctor here. And I had time up in the attic to think about your report. I knew what it would be in the end. You're a saddleman. Enough of a saddleman to see into Bert Hauser's game immediately, and to know something was wrong with Circle T. You're too much of a saddleman to send in a report that would ruin this ranch or Dad or me. I think. What? I think that you're even too much of a saddleman to leave the canyon while Circle T, while Dad and I need a man like you as much as we do. Rip tried to reason out the girl's words. Instead, his eyes clung to her, and the thought kept repeating itself that she was beautiful. Beautiful. And this Yampa Canyon ranch was a cattleman's dream. Sarah smiled blindingly, turned, and left the room. Rip raised himself a little to call her back. He was afraid she still did not understand. A quiet voice spoke from the other bed in the room. Ease back, son, John Thomas counseled. You've not only been shot up plenty, you've been roped, thrown, and tied snug with a pigging string. If you've a mind to bow your back about it, better save your breath and rest whiles you've got a chance, 'cause it'll be a chore to get untangled if that's what you're thinking of. Rip sank back onto the pillow. His mind was beginning to drift again, but along pleasant trails where the grass was deep and green. What'll you pay a foreman? He asked Thomas. Shares if he's in the family, the old man answered. It was enough for Rip Campbell. The end. Join us here to get the free Western novel Wrangler. Check out over 100 Wild Western audiobook novels on YouTube.